If you've been watching the news the past week, you've probably heard a lot about sanctions.
Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time.
Russia is facing severe sanctions by Western allies after invading Ukraine. The United States has targeted Russia's financial system.
The Russian economy is already at the threat of seizing up. The sanctions on the central bank are really unprecedented, and they're much greater than I think anyone expected, certainly than Vladimir Putin expected.
The ruble's value has plummeted. The stock market there has been closed. Companies are halting any business they were doing there.
The United States and its Western allies have imposed pretty crippling sanctions on the Russian economy. And they have no doubt been effective. The ruble is crumbling, the stock market has closed, and the Russian economy overall is absolutely tanking. And this is all in response to Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And there's been a ton of cheerleading in the West for how effective these sanctions were. So, will this stop Putin? It's hard to tell right now because it's so early, but experts have weighed in, and it looks like it might not have the desired impact. In part, it's because of how they were designed, and also researchers have studied this. They've looked at sanctions, and what they found wasn't really impressive. For instance, take this 2015 study. Written by Professor Amanda Licht, she found that sanctions rarely ever work, and they're even less effective when you're dealing with an autocrat like Putin. The study found, for most autocrats, sanctions and threats yield no significant effect. A small subset earning just the right amount of income from inelastic resources can be impressively hassled by trade disruptions. A somewhat larger group, those with massive oil endowments, experience much lower risks of meaningful failure when targeted. And that's the category Putin falls into. The goal here is to make living conditions for people in Russia so unbearable that their anger toward Putin gives him no choice but to change course. On paper, that is noble. That's a great alternative to war. And she's not alone in thinking this way. Other scholars and academics have studied the effects of sanctions as well, and the consensus seems to be uniform, that sanctions are more effective as a threat rather than actual policy prescriptions. And in this rush to isolate Russia from the rest of the world, I've noticed a pretty troubling trend. Maybe you have too.
Joining the list of companies altering their business practices in Russia, Apple, Nike, General Motors, our parent company Disney, the National Hockey League, and TikTok.
IKEA said it is temporarily halting all operations there and closing 17 stores.
Well, corporations are piling onto Russia as Disney and Warner Brothers now among the names targeting the country. They say they're going to pause their film releases in the country.
Companies around the world have taken it upon themselves to also pile on, limiting services in Russia, or completely cutting them off, or leaving the country altogether. Most notably, Visa and MasterCard have announced that they're stopping operations in Russia. PayPal too. And while some of this might be connected to Western sanctions, it does have downstream effects that impacts the average Russian, who, mind you, have nothing to do with this invasion. Other companies like Nike, Adidas, Live Nation, Spotify, and many, many more have also announced that they're closing business operations or shutting down stores or not even doing business in the country altogether. And as I saw this, I thought to myself, why? What difference does it make? And the more I thought about it, the more I kept coming back to this idea of corporate social responsibility, or CSR. If you're unfamiliar with CSR, it's just another way to describe public relations.
It's companies that have to make a statement on something. You don't have to. No one is looking to Bunkley, the software for organizing your dogs, to tell us about the murder of George Floyd. No one needs that. No one cares. And, oh, your SaaS software no longer sells to Russia. Good job! You've stopped some Russian sales guys from doing their jobs. You haven't stopped. Putin does not know what you are doing.
This is Ed Zitron. He runs a public relations company, and he's kind of jaded on the whole enterprise.
Yes, I think that it's an industry bereft of shame, or, honestly, introspection in any meaningful way.
Ed saw for years how PR was used to mask corporate malfeasance, and how PR was also used to give companies a more positive image than they might deserve. So I figured you'd probably appreciate his take on the situation.
Who is actually impressed by this? What does this stop? Putin, from what I can tell, does not seem particularly deterred by the Russian people hurting. So hurting them more does not seem... I guess you want to cut him off economically, but to a larger point, random companies no longer working with Russia is just like, who cares? Putin's not sitting there being like, oh, they can't buy shoes anymore. Oh no, they can't buy American goods that they bought from China and sell to another country. Oh no, what are we ever going to do? And that's the thing, it's just, at some point, random companies doing it, and I just don't see what value there is there.
And part of this lies in people feeling helpless and wanting to do something good in this moment. I get that. It's tough to look at this situation and not feel emotional. But the people who are arbiters of morality and justice in this world are not multinational corporations. They're you. They're the grassroots movement in the United States and around the world. That's who fuels justice. That's who brings about accountability. Not Spotify. Because so much of how people relate to action in this world boils down to consumption, there's been a growing push for other companies to leave Russia as well. One of those is McDonald's. And look, McDonald's is one of the most evil corporations. This has been, the poster child for evil corporate entities for years. So by no means is McDonald's doing good by staying in Russia. Separately, it's important to look at the role McDonald's and other fast food companies play in low-income people's lives. Chris Arnade documented this extensively in his book Dignity. And while he traveled post-industrial America, what he found was McDonald's was often a vital lifeline for people. Because it's cheap, it's packed with calories even though they're not the most healthy, and it's attainable. For some people, it's the only place they can get Wi-Fi, they can sleep in a parking lot. It's weirdly one of the last remaining community resources. And in Russia, it is some of the cheapest food you can get. A standard burger, fry, and drink meal at McDonald's in Moscow costs just a few bucks in United States dollars. But because of these sanctions, that's becoming further unattainable. So in a country that's already economically strained, removing this lifeline from communities doesn't affect Putin at all. It's only going to affect the Russian people, who again have nothing to do with this. In fact, many are opposed to this directly. Over 4,000 anti-war protesters were arrested just this weekend for speaking out about the invasion. Over 13,000 people have already been arrested since the invasion, and it's important to recognize this, because there's an idea held by some people in the United States, including former diplomats, that all Russians are unified behind this cause, and that's just not true. Take this comment from Michael McFaul, for example. McFaul, who was the ambassador to Russia in the Obama administration, in a now-deleted tweet, tried to paint all Russians with the same brush. He wrote, "There are no more innocent, neutral Russians anymore. Everyone has to make a choice, support or oppose this war. The only way to end this war is if hundreds of thousands, not thousands, protest against this senseless war. Putin can't arrest you all." And that's a very easy statement to make when you live in the United States and you're wealthy. McFaul faces no serious risk from speaking out. He isn't going to be arrested for his protests. He isn't going to be beaten for his ideas. This is an extremely privileged viewpoint. And we know he's privileged because he once bragged about it. Last year, when facing criticism on Twitter, he DM'd someone this: "I have a job for life at the best university in the world. I live in a giant house in paradise. I make close to $1 million a year. I have adoring fans on TV and 500,000 followers on Twitter, 99% who also admire me. I'm doing just fine without a visa from Russia. And I am not afraid to tweet under my own name. I feel sorry for people like you who aren't brave enough to do so." So tell me what's more brave, tweeting from your giant home in paradise, or taking to the streets in Russia knowing you risk getting arrested for speaking your mind? I think that one's pretty easy. And people like McFaul and other pundits in this country have celebrated this corporate withdrawal from Russia, and no one really seems to care about the effect it's going to have on the Russian people. But the company I want to focus on last is Disney. Disney announced it's halting all new releases in Russia as its bold stance to stick it to Putin. Think about that. Do you think he cares? And this one is laughable because at the same time, you can see how they're responding to repressive measures in Florida, where Disney World is located. That's a state that they really need access to elected officials. If you haven't heard what's happening in Florida, the state legislature just passed a bill that would outlaw any discussion of gender or sexual orientation in schools, and they call it the Don't Say Gay bill. And a lot of people look to Disney because it's one of the most powerful companies in the state to do something. Because Disney is also a company that loves to prioritize diversity and inclusion in its media. And when people presented Disney with this conundrum, they balked. Judd Legum of Public Information, which is fantastic and you should check it out, has been chronicling this. In an internal memo, the Disney CEO said they aren't going to weigh in on the bill because they're worried about blowback from the right. And then later in the memo, bragged about how they produced the show Modern Family. That's great. Modern Family was a fine show, but by no means does that help people right now in schools in Florida who are looking for education around how they might feel or how they might identify, and they can't now because of Republicans in Florida who banned it. This is corporate cowardice, but it's also a reminder of how CSR is ultimately just hollow. Companies will trot out these ideas of equity and inclusion and justice when it's convenient for them, but when there's something at stake, they're nowhere to be found. And Ed summed this up perfectly.
Disney with the Don't Say Gay bill. Disney should be saying, no money for you. They actually have the means and resources to cause some real hurt. And they honestly just don't care. I think that is the ultimate core of it. They don't actually care about anything. They care about looking good in the most vague sense, because if it's specific, then you're going to alienate someone you could sell Disney Plus to.
So on the sanctions front, this is really a situation where we needed a scalpel and not a sledgehammer. There are serious downstream effects, and even the White House acknowledged it.
And so what we're seeing now is the economy in Russia is in free fall. The economy is likely set for a deep economic recession, maybe more than 10% a year. Inflation is spiking. His war chest of foreign reserves is now worthless. The ruble is worth less than a penny. His stock market hasn't opened all week, Trevor, and rating agencies are downgrading the country to junk status. But all of these consequences are the result of Putin's choices and Putin's choices alone. We have tried to target these sanctions towards the commanding heights of the economy, in the financial sector, in the industrial sector. Of course, there are consequences beyond that.
And this corporate push for positive press isn't going to make a difference. Because at the end of the day, the guy greenlighting the wholesale slaughter of innocent civilians in Ukraine does not care if the newest Disney movie gets released in his country.